Yeah, there was a pretty significant drop.
We should be good, but what I'm concerned about is I don't see anybody else on. This,
Oh,
were people actually gonna log in?
yeah, just Counselor Larry, but
It was the only one that
was the only one, and he was going to be a little.
The rest were all just gonna watch the recording.
Correct.
Just had a panic that there was
All right,
no one on there.
there was nobody on there, nobody just checking in.
We'll get going.
Personal pictures.
Again, welcome everybody to our meeting number 2. Roll call. I don't have everybody's name down yet, so just for everybody's benefit, until we get to know each other like buddies, why don't we go around the room?
Gordon,
Pitchstone Community Economic Development for the town.
Catherine Thibodeau, Lauren Kimball,
Meredith Diamond.
Shakir Schwartz.
Dennis Cross.
Phil Rudd.
And I'm Isabel Exley, I'm the town planner.
Very good. Again, we told you last time, we're not really gonna be all that formal on this, but we have an agenda in front of us. So acceptance of the agenda, unless you've got something to add, we're gonna keep on going. Right, no minutes at this time, so that's an easy one too. Public comment period. All right, we're gonna jump right in then, new business. As Isabel said, she gave us first 3 chapters. Again, we're gonna be starting just the inventory and analysis phase of this process. So it's a lot of discussion about a whole bunch of different topics. Isabel's gonna be driving the bus today. Hello, could you remind everybody who you are?
Yeah, Laura Mitchell.
Very good. So you're up.
Okay, so what I provided you is essentially the data analysis and inventory part of the comprehensive plan for these first 3 chapters. I do want to add, I've kind of organized this in the same way as your 2014 plan was organized. You'll notice a lot of the same general headings, and then I went through and updated the data. And as I was updating the data, I was finding that there are some issues and opportunities that were explained in the 2014 plan that are still relevant to today. So some of these are mentioned or redundant to your 2014 plan. And then there were some things that I was finding that were sort of interesting, new anomalies from the data that I wanted to bring up and discuss as well. The issues and opportunities section especially will probably be subject to change as we go through public engagement starting in the fall, sort of phase 2. But this is sort of the opportunity for me to editorialize, give some information and context about the data, and yeah, some additional sort of suggestions as we understand them at this point. What Phil is handing out is a copy of the presentation that I'm going to show on the screens up here, so you can feel free to follow along in either way. This is also essentially just a visual summary of the issues and opportunities of the 3 sections. And I've included some time after discussion of each chapter for any questions that you might have, so that we can get those answered as well. So I think the agenda had us starting with population, so I'll go through that quickly. So this visualization that you're seeing is just sort of a different way to visualize the data that I've already provided in the draft. So in terms of a sort of issue and sort of opportunity, growth in the elderly population, specifically those 75 and older, is projected to continue to grow, and by 2040 is projected to make up about 7% of the community. It currently makes up about 5.3% of the community. This will likely end up requiring, higher medical and public safety services, higher demand for those things, as well as for retirement housing, assisted living, nursing home units, and the like. and I'll talk a little bit more about sort of the opportunity there in the housing section, but in terms of the data at this point, these projections were put together from the average rate of growth for each age cohort from between 1990 and 2020. Using that average rate of growth, we're able to predict the percentage, the proportion of the that age in the next census and the census following that. So also documented in the 2014 plan, Orono, of course, has a highly educated population, especially when you start to compare that to the rest of the county and to the state of Maine as a whole. Obviously, retaining highly educated individuals will continue and should continue to be a top priority for the town, since these people bring with them obviously unique expertise that allows them to contribute to local nonprofits, the town's civic life, but also frankly, higher wealth and disposable income that can be spent patronizing local businesses. On the opposite side, we do have some pretty high population disparities, especially in regards to poverty. So in Orono, about 2,100 people, or almost 30% of the population, was living in poverty in 2020. Of these, about 87 people were seniors that were older than 65, and 55 people were children under the age of 18. Obviously, that means that the vast majority of those living in poverty were people between the ages of 18 and 24, meaning that this number is likely heavily skewed by students who are living in poverty while they're in school. Just for comparison's sake, across Penobscot County, that would also include Orono's numbers, about 13.4% of people are living in poverty. But in terms of Orono, the number of seniors living in poverty has increased since 2010, a small amount, but an increase of 43 people. And obviously, while this represents a small number of the overall population living in poverty, this growing share could mean the loss of longtime Orono residents, as they might be forced to move to an area that they can more reasonably afford. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the housing section as well. This was another thing that was documented in your 2014 plan. It was the loss of family households and the family aged population. This had dropped about 5% between 2000 and 2010, and that would be the number of family households in the community. That number has actually dropped 8% further between 2010 and 2020. Interestingly, in that same time period, the US Census actually reclassified its definition of a family to include people that were cohabitating as partners but were technically unmarried, which was not counted in any census before 2010. So you would expect the number of family households under the new classification to have gone up in that time period. And again, it actually has gone down by about 8%. The number of family households where children under 18 are present has likewise been steadily dropping. In 2000, the number of family households with children was 583. In 2010, this number dropped to 483, and then as of the 2020 census, this number is now at 350. So put differently, Orono has seen almost a 40% drop in family households with children since the year 2000. Interestingly, though, at the same time, Orono had 1,028 children in 2020. That number has gone up really significantly by about 15.8% since 2010. When there were 888 children. So it's sort of interesting. These statistics suggest that the adults in Orono who are having children are probably just having more children, leading to an overall increase in the number of children in the community, but not as many households actually having children. So just from that information, one can extrapolate that in the 350 households with children, there are approximately 2.93 children, between 2 and 3 children per home. In terms of issues and opportunities, that was what I really wanted to highlight. If you have any questions about the population and demographics chapter in general, any of the data presented, I'm happy to kind of dive into anything else.
I might as well take the opportunity to reinforce. So the expectation is that you're gonna be able to read the material that Isabel provides prior to the meeting. There was a lot of meat in here to digest. So when I discussed this with Isabel the other day, just talking about process, the intent wasn't to go through every item in the summary. So again, being prepared and reading this ahead of time and hopefully developing some questions would be, the way that we'll approach this so that we can continue to make progress. But there's, again, an awful lot of information in there. So I guess, again, if you have questions, fire away, but the intent was, and please provide feedback, if this isn't gonna work for you, but this is our intent, that we will just kind of summarize, or Isabel will summarize some of the chapter material, and then we can get into more in-depth discussions.
Can you say a little bit about the definition of pop in this context versus what we were looking at? Did the definitions changed, and in what ways?
So the definition of poverty comes from the US Census Bureau. I don't know how they're defining it off the top of my head, or what the numeric rate that they're using is. I do want to note that that definition has not changed in that time period. So it should be the same definition. I just don't know off the top of my head what their sort of numeric value they're currently using is. But I can follow up with that.
That's okay.
It changes based on like number of members per household, right? So like
Yeah.
that poverty number shifts based on how many people live in a household.
And the income levels, I'm sure, adjust, but still an income level there.
It struck me quite a bit, the 40% drop since 2000 in family households with children. That's a significant decline. Is there a reason for that?
So the only thing that I could really understand is that, and of course, this is sort of at least nationwide trend, if not worldwide trend. People are generally having less children. But it's interesting. I think the drop is primarily coming from that, people having less children. But again, those who are having children in town, and this is something that you don't typically see, are just having more of them. So like the number of children hasn't gone down too much. It's just the number of households with children in them has gone down pretty significantly.
Because you would look at that number and think that there's a pretty significant impact to our school systems, but apparently not, if the number of kids is actually increased.
What are those households replaced with? Like, can you,
In terms of family households.
what are there more now?
So there are a lot more non-family households now, so that would be either people living by themselves or people living with roommates that they don't consider a partner for the census terms.
Right.
So that number has actually increased quite significantly in the same time period.
And would we think that's university related, or do you think that there's more professional, non-family households in town?
So I would say it would be primarily the large student housing projects that have come on board.
Okay, yep,
I would say that that's a pretty large driving factor.
Yep.
And then obviously there are some, professional households that just don't have children in them. But I would say the biggest factor is probably those large units.
When was that first one of those built?
How does that explain the 40% drop though? Because shouldn't it be, the family households shouldn't be changing just because you're adding something else, right?
You know what, it might be linked to this.
Or is it
too.
just the
is.
percentage?
It's like if people are, they have a graduate degree, I assume they can afford more children. So if there's a high population of people that are educated in Orono, they have, 3 kids per household versus in towns where everyone has 1. So it's the people that, there's a lot of students, like 16,000 kids that go to UNA, right? So all those housing places, plus all the people that do have families, there's fewer of them, but they have a lot more kids because they have more money.
Yeah, and in this, it talks about how if you remove the students from the population, our average income is dramatically higher than both Bangor and the surrounding communities. So, a lot of times these highly educated families just choose not to have children. And when they do, they have more. But I think we are seeing, particularly in my generation, I have a lot of friends who don't have kids. Right? And I think that that's probably
I
part
have
of
a
it.
lot of friends who have 3 or more.
Good for them.
So to get back to your question about the number of houses, the number of family households, the number in 2000 frankly wasn't huge to begin with.
What page are you on?
So,
And for the future, can we number
yeah,
these? Yeah,
so I am, but
but for the PDF, the number.
yes, sorry, give me 1 second. I'm
Like, 7 maybe? Seven?
okay,
I
yes,
think it
I'm
is
on
7.
page 7 of the PDF under household composition. So in 2000, the number frankly wasn't huge. It was 583. So that 40% drop is going from 583 to 350. So it is the number. Yeah.
I think we gotta keep in mind too, the strong correlation or covariance here with housing opportunity. I look at my cohort, we all had kids 20 years, 30, 40, well, 40 years, sorry. We all had kids in our households and we don't any longer. And we're not moving, we're not going anywhere, we're staying here.
Right.
A lot of people.
I was gonna try and point the finger at a different generation.
So I.
No, but that's, the other takeaway from this was we need other senior housing opportunities as a way to shift
Clearly.
opportunity.
Because
Yeah,
the housing isn't available, Laura, that's what you're
There's
saying.
no-
Families aren't coming because there's no
There's
housing.
no
Right.
housing for young families.
yeah.
Just isn't it?
I had a sort of a separate question on that first page. When you're looking at, and I don't know if this is even a thing, but when you're looking at a town that's properly balanced, a university town, is there like a target balance between age, age groups? Like when you say like, we're gonna have 7% of people 75 and plus, is that a bad thing? I mean, it's a bad thing because it's more, not a bad thing, but it's more and there's impacts of it, but is a town, do we strive for something?
Yeah, what are our like kind of similar towns, right? Where you've got a large university in a very rural place. What are our kind of comparative towns? Like who can we say, these are our benchmarks for like who we're like? Are we
Is it-
talking like Lowell?
Is it more looking at your workforce though? And jobs, and you want like people of working age to align with what jobs you have? Like that to me would, because it showed a lot of people worked at UMaine but lived in other places.
Mhm.
And those are, a chunk of those would be families.
To your question, I think to sort of get at both of your points, I don't have a comparison at this point, but I think one of my next questions was, is there any data that's not provided that you want to see? And I think that would be a great one, like how do we comp with other university communities? The one I think of, it's a little bit different, but like Waltham, Massachusetts, like they have a fairly large university, but they are suburban, not as rural as us, but like
Probably UNH.
yeah.
Yeah.
Be a similar, but once again, I think it gets really hard when you try to do that, even when you talk about rural, what rural means and what that is in each place. And the demographic of that general area to begin with factors into a lot of
Right.
stuff. So it's really hard to compare. I mean, we've tried when we've looked at municipal government to say, well, how do we compare with another? And Durham was kind of the place where we came to that was like, oh, it's kind of similar, this is how it works, but there's so many factors in that it makes it difficult, but I certainly think that's worth it.
What
Something to
about
look
New
at.
London, New Hampshire? That would be another one that you guys look at that.
Yeah, very much smaller college.
Yeah.
Very, very much smaller.
We did have comps last time
Okay,
for the process. I don't remember what they were.
Back in the day, the entire council went down to Clemson University
Oh, really?
and visited Clemson University as a comparison community? How did they deal with town gown issues? And how did they, what mechanisms and structures did they have? And I don't know where all of that analysis went. It's somewhere.
Even 10 years ago, because we were looking for comps for student housing and how to manage that student housing creeping into established family neighborhoods, and I don't remember which ones we looked at, whether that would be in any notes.
I certainly think it makes sense and we can
Yeah.
look back at history, but also find.
Throughout this process, this topic is gonna come up again, what other college towns do.
Absolutely.
Finding a good comp or two or three would be good.
Is part of it though, determining like what Orono wants, not so much like what a comp does, but like, do we want more families? And then you're like, oh, okay, yeah, how do we do that? Let's look at examples. But
It helps with difficult issues. The student housing was one. How do you manage students? I live in the Webster neighborhood over there. When we first moved into our house, 1997, there was all kinds of families all around us. Now we're surrounded by students. So they just took over the neighborhood. So the discussion we had was how to limit that. It's a really tough problem. So it helps to look at other communities with
I
colleges.
think
So
that still is a problem though.
yeah,
So it
clearly,
would be
but
worth like talking about again.
Yeah.
I just mean like, if you're gonna go comp, like, let's figure out what we wanna comp around first.
certainly.
It
Uh,
also might be helpful to look at what other college communities are trying to do. And if there are other college, Durham, New Hampshire has been trying to attract more young families and they have a mechanism to do that, or they found a way. So like you said, kind of picking away at what are those things, and that might help to have comps of what might be like us, but then also what have other college communities done that maybe are in line with what we're looking to do and how they've been successful.
I think also to me, it is balancing school population and ability. I mean, right, if we attract 1,000 new families, that's a little dramatic, but then that's gonna be 2,000 new kids in our schools, and that's gonna create, right, I just like, to me, I would think there would be some kind of, guard, or for me, it would be helpful to just sort of know what other, well, you're gonna do that, so I don't have to say that again.
And I know, oh God, what is the Bank of Boston gave grants to communities all over the US. And they were looking at these similar types of issues, how to attract people to more rural areas. I know that Piscataquis County got one. I know Piscataquis, Penobscot got one. So there's a couple, and people have across the United States gotten these grants. And then you can kind of read some of their data. I forget what they call
You're
it.
talking about the working communities. General.
That's the one. Thank you.
So
They've
there
got
is,
good
there is one in the Bangor region.
There is.
That is around workforce.
It is,
Yeah.
but some of the communities have focused more on housing
Yep.
or some of these other issues, and there's really good data because it's a grant.
Yep.
So that might be an interesting place to look as we start kind of coming up against these issues and saying, hey, like, what's a good solution for blank? That might be a good place to mine because it's recent.
Thank you. Other comments?
So what are we trying to achieve in these meetings as we look through stuff?
You were not here the last time, so could you reiterate the phases and what the purpose of each phase
Yeah.
is, please?
In the packet that I sent for our May 1st meeting over email, I put together my scope of work that the town council had approved.
Yeah, I looked at that.
So there's sort of 3 different phases. The first phase is really just going through and making sure you all are familiar with sort of existing conditions data on the ground as they exist currently. Then when we move on to phase 2, we'll be doing a lot more public engagement to hear, I've identified some issues just from the data analysis, but what are the actual issues that the community has experienced, hearing a lot more from them. Then in phase 3, we'll go through and actually attempt to at least solve or start to solve some of those issues by doing the actual policy making work of creating goals, objectives, and action strategies for the plan. That's not until really the last like 6 months of the process, so we kind of have a long road ahead of us to get there. But really at this point, I'm just trying to make sure that you all understand existing conditions on the ground. And that we're all on the same page with sort of what the data is telling us about our issues as a community.
Several of these meetings, we will have invited guests, experts to come in and talk to us about specific things. With these first 3 chapters, we're leaning pretty heavily on Isabel and some of the work she's done.
But so we're at the end of the population stuff. Are we gonna like dig into each of these potential issues? Or is it just like, here's a potential list of issues and then we're gonna move on?
At this point, that's a good question. So at this point, we're really not solving a lot of things right now. We're taking stock of all things Orono. We'll go through, so everybody understands really what we're working toward, and then we do a lot of listening, as Isabel said. And then we start working on solutions.
Okay.
So if we see something that's an issue, an opportunity at this point, would that be helpful to add, or are we wanting to just use yours?
So mine is only based on the data analysis. If your reading of the data
Yeah.
is different, then feel free to share that at this point. Or again, if there's additional data you
Right,
want.
just based on the data.
Yes.
yeah. I don't have anything, I was just asking.
That makes sense?
It does.
yeah.
Can I ask one question? And I did read this, but maybe when we were talking about family households and then attracting more kids and the schools, do we layer in like school capacity or need in this at all?
So I haven't addressed any school capacity or needs at this point. I think as we start to, somebody brought up the point, what do we actually want to see in
Yeah.
terms of the population that we're trying to attract? I think at that point, that would be really when we need to consider all of those different
Okay.
issues.
Okay.
Questions?
Okay, so I'm just moving on to housing, and it was sort of already mentioned that a lot of our housing issues could potentially be solved with the right resources. So we talked about that the specifically the elderly population, so those over 75 is projected to grow up to 7% of the community. The cohort age 65 plus is projected to grow by about 42% or to reach about 497 people in the year 2040. So that is going to lead to higher demand for retirement housing, assisted living, nursing home units, things like that with regard to housing. Now, the right resources would actually allow this population to age in place and could provide turnover in the existing housing stock. So I think that was the point you were getting at, was, as we age and we start to live in these 1 or 2 person households, we might have 3 or 4 bedrooms, and the data has actually shown that there are those 65 and older who are just 1 person households. Many of them are living in 3 and 4 bedroom homes. So
Jeff, when are you gonna move?
Move in with you, that's the bigger question.
I want my grandchildren to come and visit.
yeah, so
And so I'm not going
So
to.
that's part of it, right? Is like, of course, there's this choice here where
Can't
some
point the
people
finger.
want and desire more space. But then there are probably people who would be willing to move if they could stay in Orono and have, a smaller place with less maintenance that they would be a little bit more taken care of. We don't really currently have those kinds of resources is what the data is showing us, or at least not enough of those resources. So we currently have almost 900 units headed by people 65 and older. 320 of those are rental and 578 are ownership. I also have in the near the last page of the housing section, in all those little bubbles, we talk a little bit more about sort of being housing cost burden. And that's spending more than 30% of your income on housing. So there are 318 seniors in Orono that are currently housing cost burdened. And if we had more regulated, affordable, so when I say affordable in this context, I'm meaning something that is for folks making less than about $50,000 a year and limited to those that are 65 and older. So that sort of cohort of folks, if they had affordable senior housing, could potentially move into those and free up their larger housing units for families, if that's what we are trying to do, and also would be potentially better able to afford their housing units. And there's a lot more data and information about that as we kind of near the end of the chapter in the projected future demand section. So in terms of an opportunity, there is a couple of opportunities with respect to housing in the community. LD 2003 is the bill number that was adopted by the legislature in 2022. So at the state level, the town adopted local provisions to comply with this law in December of 2023. The law required municipalities to increase housing densities across their communities in a variety of ways. So it allowed additional housing units to be built on lots that were previously zoned only for single family homes. And that was a large area of Orono. It allowed accessory dwelling units, or sometimes called granny flats or mother-in-law apartments, on any lot with a single family home, or any lot where a single family home is allowed, really. And then it allowed up to 2.5 times the base density for qualified affordable housing projects if located within the municipality's growth area as identified through the comprehensive plan. That's something that we're going to have to talk more about in the future. I just want to sort of get that in the back of your mind right now, that the growth area has become a really, really important area in comprehensive planning across the state, because we have this allowance for up to 2.5 times the number of dwelling units that would have been previously allowed on the property before these provisions took effect. I talked a little bit about ADUs. ADUs, similar to mobile homes, are effectively affordable housing. Now, they're typically not regulated affordable housing or limited to a certain income, but they end up being effectively affordable housing because of their low cost and their small size. So with the need for affordable housing that has been documented in this chapter, there is potential for many more ADUs, and the amendments to the town's land use ordinance that occurred as a result of LD 2003 will likely result in a higher amount of ADUs being built in Orono over the coming years, since they actually made it easier and cheaper to build an ADU by removing some requirements that were there previously. That one gets a little bit into zoning, and I'm happy to answer any questions when we get to that point, but just to give you a brief overview. In terms of another documented issue, so there's generally a lack of vacant for sale units. So an average of 19 housing units were vacant pending sale at any given time in 2022, which is the last time that data from the Census Bureau was available for that number. Typically, a healthy housing market has about 5% of housing units on the market at any given time in order to accommodate demand, like people moving from one place to another because of job, people who have more kids and need to get a larger home, or any other life event that might make you want to move. So having very few units on the market in Orono at any given time suggests that the local economy might end up being in danger. The economy requires workers to be able to fill open positions as an increasing number of residents obviously reach retirement age and as new positions come on the market. So without enough homes for workers to fill those open positions, businesses may at times struggle and even worse, fail. That 5% number is coming from a state report that documented a housing crisis across the state back in October of last year. And just so you're aware, this number of 19 housing units was essentially on any given day. I think as if you've looked at any real estate website recently, most properties that are for sale in Orono right now are staying on the market for, what would you say, probably an average of like 4 days. It is a very low amount of days.
And the other thing that skews that is there are a lot of houses that never make the market.
Yeah,
They're sold privately and they know they're gonna do it, so, but there are a lot of houses being sold, they turn over, you just, from the outside. It's hard, like if I wanted to move here from outside of Orono, it's very difficult to do that because you don't see them on the market. Most of those things are happening because people live here, they've got here somehow, and they want a different house and then they move.
And you know, like the 5%, I think is like 175,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
Like that, just because 5%, you don't know what percent 19 is, like it's not noted what percent 19 is, so you don't
Yeah.
know, like, it's a huge gap.
Yeah.
That we're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think another thing to keep in mind is that when you're viewing these kinds of statistics, Orono is not a little island surrounded by wilderness. Okay, it's part of a larger metropolitan area of several municipalities. We all have the same problems. There's workforce housing issues, but it's not an Orono workforce housing issue, it's a regional workforce housing issue. And Orono can do a lot of things, but maybe nothing that they can do is gonna influence that in any way. If people have cars, they can drive from Old Town to the university, drive from Orono to the university, they can drive from VZ to the university, Glenwood to the university. And that's the main employer in the region, is the university. So it's not a municipality issue.
Well, I guess there's a lot Orono can or can't do. Like, think of the student housing that went in and how much that changed the community. So what if there was 2 massive workforce housing developments that went in Orono? It could dramatically change the family count, or things can dramatically change in one
You
community.
also have to remember that Orono did not do that. Investors saw an opportunity, they did that, Orono didn't.
Orono permitted it.
Yeah, which is,
Wasn't that and maybe, I don't know, but I assumed that came out of and must have been supported in some way of the desire to not have as many students in the neighborhoods, which was what.
That was certainly.
Just
No.
a,
This proceeded, Orchard Trails when that came out, well before the comp plan.
I don't think it's like was that right or wrong? I'm just saying there's a lot a town can do to have an impact. Particularly when we're talking about a couple hundred people.
The town can create the opportunity by zoning in a certain way to allow that kind of development. The town does not do the development. The town can structure the opportunity. But that's private investment.
And some of those, the student housing, the initial ones, the town land use ordinance was lax enough that there was the Peregrine development wasn't ideal. And they stopped that one. Orchard Trails came in, and then there was a flurry of them because apparently somebody's market research said that they could provide those units off campus, and that's the way it went. But the town and the ordinances that were developed didn't drive that. That was, as Jeff said, completely outside of what our town efforts were.
Right. There are towns in our state that are doing a lot that is not even dollars to bring in housing development.
Yes.
And so I just don't want us to feel powerless in our ability to impact some of this if some goals are set and there's interest.
Good point.
That's what the comprehensive plan is all about. What do we have to change about what we're doing to encourage that kind of investment in the community?
Well, I mean, I hear what you're saying about, we're not an island and we live in, the midst of larger forces. But I think that one way in which we are an island is that we are a community into which people want to move to access the schools in a way that is not a shared characteristic with the surrounding communities. And at the same time, in our 9-12 infrastructure, we are dependent upon students opting into Orono in order to maintain our enrollment and the programming that our enrollment facilitates. And so we have a model that is vulnerable to the lack of population growth in communities around us. And that's what we're experiencing right now. Like our enrollment next year at the high school is dropping by 40 students, which for us is a substantial number. Largely because of the fact that our surrounding towns are in a dip in their populations, right? You know, towns that, you know, historically send us many students just have way fewer students who have graduated 8th grade. And that is something that we have weathered for FY25 in a way that has really minimal impact with respect to programming. I don't think that the same thing is going to be true next year, because next year, the current 7th graders who will be 8th graders next year are similarly, similar population dip in surrounding towns. And when we look at how, we can't plant kids in surrounding towns. So then the question feels like it becomes, if we want to maintain the programming that we have in this district, which is phenomenal for the scale of our district, then we have to come up with alternative solutions. And the number of times that I have a 5-year-old son, the number of times I hear families say, I want my kids in Orono, I just can't find a house, is to me like this flashing sign that, okay, so maybe we can't grow kids in the surrounding towns, but what we can do is make it possible for families with kids to be here. And that to me feels like a pressing issue, because we are not that far from a time when the diversity of programming that we have is going to be significantly compromised by the lack of students in the building. And either we find a way to solve that problem now, or we will experience the cascade of effects that a shift in programming will inevitably have on the community as a whole.
Do we have like data about policies at our like top 5 sending schools or things like that? Like obviously you have population data, but do we look at what they're doing in their towns as well? And kind of, I mean, I kind of see Orono as being like a leadership kind of a town. And I think a lot of other towns look at us in a similar way. Are there ways that we can, maybe help them out with their process? I don't know.
I mean, we have good relationships with, the towns that send to us primarily. And we have, our recent conversation, our most recent board meeting, the conversation was about the need to look at this as a branding issue, right? How do we, what is the brand of Orono schools, and how do we articulate that in a way that is clear and compelling, and how do we communicate that to a broader audience that is within reach, not in 8th grade, but, really, K to 8. And, those efforts are well and good, and concurrently do not increase the number of kids we have to recruit from. And that really, to me, feels like the pressing issue, because the other part of it is that the communities from which we recruit primarily have a range of programming K to 8 that is different than the programming we have K to 8. And so what we actualize at the high school is a bimodal population distribution of students who, because they went through RSU 26 from the beginning, have had access to opportunities and are achieving at a certain level, and whose needs have been met much earlier often than they are in other communities. And then we have students who are coming out to us in 9th grade with, a very different profile. And so, the idea of maximizing the impact of what students in this district get to experience, pre-K to 8, I think would be, another impact of finding a way to, increase what, the housing that's available. At the same time, I look at a district like Herman, right, who had unbridled growth and who now is beyond capacity in its buildings, right, and don't see that as a model either. But at the same time, we have tremendous opportunity to grow within our current facility in a way that is, I think, going to be necessary to keep the programming that we have.
We also don't have the land. Like, us turning into a town like Herman is not as much of an option
For sure.
for us. So
Affordability is a big deal too. I mean, I've had a number of conversations over the years about
yeah,
families, young families that just can't afford to move here.
yeah.
Jeff, yeah?
We do have the land. We
There-
don't have is access to the land. We have an ordinance in town that you cannot have a one-way, dead end street that's longer than what?
2,500 feet.
2,500. All of the land in our growth area,
Yeah.
the comprehensive plan identifies as the place we want development. Our growth area is unreachable.
We actually have
Yeah,
in our
that-
neighborhood a giant strip of that land that's not accessible. It's privately owned.
It cannot
People
be
own it.
developed
Yeah,
because you
can't be
cannot
developed.
have, there's no,
Ever.
you have to have another egress. That's a big problem. We've
I see that
tried,
as an opportunity.
Thank you. that's
Yeah,
really-
we've talked about that connectivity and trying to minimize dead end streets because it's just easier for utility development, all those kinds of things. A lot of bonuses just to have
The other
interconnected networks.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna add. The other thing that I would add is, you know, we have certain minimum lot width sizes, we have certain minimum lot area sizes, and in a number of areas, especially in our medium density residential zoning district, which I can show on the screen, actually. So that's this entire yellow area on this map above. In that zoning district, we have a variety of lots that almost meet the standard to have sort of two buildable lots, but don't quite, and that's a pretty low impact sort of infill development way. If we adjusted our minimum lot width and lot area standards just slightly. So I would say, rather than, I mean, I think that having limited land in Orono's areas where we might want to have development is probably a fairly true statement. But I also think, to your point, we have to be a little bit creative about our ordinance standards from, you know, this dead end length, our minimum lot width standards, our density requirements, if we're going to accomplish a lot of what I'm hearing.
Can you
all
explain
talk about.
this to me?
Mhm.
Like, I didn't quite hear what these different colors.
So the map that I'm showing on the screen right now is our zoning map. The yellow area is our medium density residential zone, which essentially has, you know, it was historically a single family only zone, essentially until the adoption of the LD 2003 standards in December. Although I would say I think people have thought about it as a historically single family zone. There was always grandfathered multifamily buildings within that zoning district. So that is the medium density residential area. Some of these orange ones that are quite smaller are high density residential, where larger multifamily units might be allowed. And then of course, you know, we have the forest and agriculture zoning district, which is essentially quite rural. And then we sort of have some business and commercial districts in between.
the commercial district is where all of the student housing developments.
Yeah.
It's all in the C2 zone.
Yeah, so that's sort of this area here, and the gray hatched areas are student housing properties.
And that was something that the town did do. They changed the zoning laws in the C2 zone specifically to allow the high density student housing development. And we created the opportunity, and investors came in and exploited the opportunity that the town provided.
So
We also
I guess,
have,
is that a bad, do people see those as a bad thing, those student housing? Because, oh, okay.
15 years ago, the development of those units saved this town's ass.
I was just wanting to like, because I was.
At the time when,
Yeah.
when state revenue sharing was taking a big nosedive, those things arrived on the scene, and we kind of
They must pay a lot of taxes.
It was touch and go for a few years.
But there were a lot of learning lessons
Yeah.
from those, so we had to
Right.
amend ordinances to try to,
To maintain
yeah,
some
try to
quality
hone
or.
them in a little
Yeah,
bit.
yeah.
So there's not much opportunity for additional ones at the moment, if I
Mm-hmm.
recall. Not really many areas that we can look to.
we also have like a ton of non-conforming lots in that medium residential, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, we moved from down there in a non-conforming lot, a very non-conforming lot, to kind of a more conforming lot in the same district. And, you know, as I was kind of living there, I was like, we had a lot of students, Jeff lives in that neighborhood. You know, we had some students who would live there, but we were really close to our neighbors, and it wasn't the end of the world. It was actually nice, right? Like there's always gonna be neighborhoods where people wanna have those larger lot sizes. But I would love to at least explore seeing some smaller lot sizes considered to be conforming.
Infill development is just a huge idea.
Yeah.
I mean, we've looked at that. whether some of you know or not, there was a proposed development just up the street that basically was gonna connect a lot of dead end roads, provided, I don't know how many units,
68.
Black Bear Heights. Really nice project,
Next to the
two
school.
phases.
Rental.
Yeah, Renzo and then Vernal Pools shut it down, and which I get that, the environmental concern, but then the town went another step to come up with a really creative program to assess vernal pools and try to provide, protect the high value ones and consider development, infill development that's, because we want the walkable communities too, all this new housing, walkability, there's so many issues, but it was unfortunate that it didn't happen, it got shut down by.
And now it's 40 acres with one house.
Yeah, it's what,
It's 40 acres with one house.
Tozer's property? It's not Tozer's, it's.
No, it's
Yeah.
No,
at the end of Spencer.
Yeah, we got purchased it.
It got purchased and they're building one house.
I haven't followed it as well.
So, I wanted to add just briefly for those, there was a lot of talk a little bit there about non-conforming lots and infill development, just to define those a little bit for those unfamiliar. A non-conforming lot is a lot that doesn't currently meet our zoning ordinance standards for that minimum lot width and minimum lot area that I was talking about. And then infill development is usually like a lot by lot, fairly small. You might have a duplex or sometimes even a triplex, but usually a single family home that goes in on a smaller lot size in an already established neighborhood.
How, is the vernal, that's the DEP, not the town, right? For the vernal pools? And how did OEDC work around that for the target technology? They did offsite? Because there's huge wetlands through there.
That's interesting.
So why-
We could go a whole
That's
nother,
actually in here.
a whole nother day.
Yeah, I detailed
It is
a
in
little
there.
bit in economy, yeah.
But like, is that an opportunity in other areas?
The Orono Economic Development Corporation at the moment is trying to float a project called Vernal Pools Sample Program, Special Areas Management Program. The Army Corps of Engineers is largely the institution that controls development around vernal pools. Army Corps of Engineers, Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. State of Maine has laws on the books about vernal pools and what you can do around them. The federal government had laws about vernal pools. Supreme Court recently took away the federal jurisdiction, but we still have the state jurisdiction around vernal pool development. So the Special Areas Management Program is a program where in the growth area of a community where there's a vernal pool that's hindering a development, that vernal pool can be compromised or even destroyed completely, as long as a equivalent environmental system, ecosystem is preserved in perpetuity somewhere else in the community.
Right, offsite, yeah.
And that's we're trying to do a pilot project to demonstrate to the state how this works. Orono and Topsom, we've spent about 15 years getting this on the books. It's on the books and has not been used yet anywhere in the state.
This is with the support of one of the foremost pool experts at UMaine around Calhoun.
Cal.
Right. So is that at our disposal as we think about growth areas or appropriate areas for growth?
We hope to make it available for the community to exercise that as an option to encourage development in the growth area.
The ordinance enabling it is on the books. It has not been tested as yet.
Yeah, part of our discussion.
The
is
state
moving forward
books.
being-
On Orno's local, in our local ordinance.
Yeah, we need to find a better way to incentivize some of these concepts that we've been thinking about for a while.
I can talk to you about this. for a while. Ask me questions sometime in the week. I'd be happy to come and talk to you about
Yeah,
it.
the target one, just to follow up on that too. I think when they originally mapped it out, I'm not sure if they had a great handle on all the wetlands, but when they really looked a little bit closer, they realized there was a lot of impact over there and, had to reconfigure how that that whole development was gonna
The
be.
Army Corps held the town hostage for about 15 years over the violations that are in the tech park around vernal pools and wetlands. And they wouldn't let us do anything until we resolved that, and it took, I don't know, what did it take, a few $100,000 to set it straight.
But there's been other developments that have been approved by planning board. There was one that was behind the Boy Scout building off of Kelly Road, which is gonna go in there. It was mixed use. It was actually a really nice concept. And it just died on the vine. There was residential housing, there was, I think, some commercial, some industrial, really interesting proposal. And it just never went anywhere, zero development in there, and now it's reverted back to,
We even got it permitted,
yeah, it was all permanent. It was
it's all permitted, and the permits have now expired.
potentially connecting Page Place, you know, paralleling Kelly Road all the way behind there. It's just a really good idea. Provide other routes of travel. It solved a lot of issues and basically went nowhere. So somehow we've got to do a better job in this comp plan to incentivize those projects so they can happen and bring developers here.
I was talking with a real estate agent in town recently just about, the housing situation and our school population. And she said that developers steer clear of here and because the perception is that it is just too hard to get things done. And I look at the ADU, the new ADU parameters, and I did an addition on my house and I had this great old 2-car garage that had a lot of personality and wanted to turn that into an ADU, and fighting the town on that was exhausting. And I ultimately ended up with a place that isn't permitted for anybody to sleep in because the town wouldn't let me do it. And if I had tried to do that, after December of 2023, then, maybe that would have been a different story. But, having had my own experience with that, and, the idea that, we'd be happy to host grad students, we'd be happy to host small families moving from other countries, needing a place to stay. And the fact that that was, eliminated as an option just, to me, it leaves me wondering if, when we bring in experts for this conversation, if it would be possible to, bring in a developer who has pivoted away from Orono, to ask.
We have a resident developer and we'll ask Mr. Cross his opinion. I want to push back on that a little bit because, I've been on planning board these 18, 19 years now. And that perception has carried through for so long, but the town staff, your predecessor and planning staff has made so many improvements. I think we have turned down in 19 years, I think one project, one or two. And again, the town staff has done a great job amending their practices to promote development. So
The reality.
hearing the real estate agent say that is very difficult for me because we've approved almost anything.
It's a matter of branding that, and the idea that.
The reality is
old
that's
story
the
persists.
perception.
Exactly, but here we are
You know.
19 years later, and I haven't heard that in a while, but it just ruffles feathers because it's like, we try to change ordinances. We have projects and it's still out there. So yeah, I agree. So
I feel like we're
that's
pretty easy
an
to
issue
work
and
with.
opportunity.
I feel like we're pretty easy to work with, and I came into this town from another town that was my perception of Orono, because I moved from Carmel where there's like, it's wild man's land, you can just do whatever in Carmel, and I moved here and I was like, oh God, it's gonna be so bad. I got on the planning board and we are
But
so easy to work with.
It's the same misconception with small business.
mean-
I hear so many people saying it's so hard to do business here. I'm like, it is, but you actually have to plan for being an Orono, like summers are slow and the town's not that hard. There's some weird things about no sprinklers being in certain places.
But I guess,
So-
yeah,
so I-
what I would say, but
I want to address. Yes.
We'll talk about that
what I
another time,
would
sorry.
say though is
It's
that.
hard either way.
Is that, and I don't know this, and I really don't know this, but perhaps it's not the people and the decision makers, but it is the ordinances and the
No, yeah,
requirements and the
Yeah.
planning
Yeah.
that make it as a
Thank you.
deterrent. So that it's, and
they
I
were
think
created
that's
out of
probably what
this.
Meredith was
Right.
saying.
Just so we're clear, these all come out of the comprehensive plan.
Yeah.
That's why
So-
this whole thing is.
Right, so as you talk about, when you're here, this is the things that are important to understand how they go. Staff And the planning board has to follow the rules that are set forth, whether it's the state, federal, or town ordinances. And so that's where the challenge comes in. Our goal is, we know we have some things on here that are a little bit different than other communities. How do we tell you everything you're gonna need to know going into it, so you can make a decision whether it makes sense to be here or not? But I think hearing what you're saying, you're in the right place, because this is where all those rules were developed.
Right, and we try to make that clear during planning board meetings that it's like, you have an opportunity. I know you might be angry that you didn't get everything you wanted out of a developer and, make him do this, that, and the other, but you have an opportunity to change that.
And I didn't mean to imply that it was the people, like that was not, that wasn't.
No, it's just interesting to me that that perception is still out there so many years later when you turn down one project over time.
But if you're saying there's people that are putting things in comp plans to make it harder because they aren't happy with who their neighbor is, whatever it is,
Yeah.
then that is what Meredith's talking about, is that,
Right, and I'm trying to get a project in front of planning board and I can't because it doesn't comply with like this crazy requirement that is completely uncompliant in my neighborhood, let alone like on a school ground. So, but that's a separate.
but that,
We all
I mean,
clearly have something.
You can't get on the planning board agenda if you're not completely compliant with all of the
So
ordinances.
just let's be clear, you could, but you're gonna get turned down, so why would you want to? Why would you wanna go to the planning board to be turned down because you can't meet the ordinance?
I think for people who are not professional developers or people, it's about a dialogue, right? I mean, I think like it's about the opportunity for dialogue and conversation, and I can concur with Laura, because it's me too.
But I'm gonna back Mitch on this one, because again, the rules are set for us. If projects come in and they follow the rules, we have really no reason to deny them. So it's town staff's role to make sure that projects follow the rules and they come in and again, you have to be adept at kind of pushing back at developers and trying to squeeze in like screening or different tools to protect neighbors. But if your project doesn't meet the rules, sorry, we can't approve
I
it.
think
That's just
That's
the-
when you're saying, and this is neither, but like you're saying, we've only disapproved one project.
Yep.
Like, that's what's gotten in front of you. So that's why, like, the nitty gritty of the ordinances, which aren't quite honestly what we're even digging into this with the comp plan, are so critical.
Well, it would be a bigger, right? It would be a sort of a bigger, not the nitty gritty of the ordinance, but the comp plan could say,
This is
have
what
an
we want.
engaged process
Well,
to
this is what
get
we
rid of
want,
it, to whatever, balance it a
The
little bit more.
ordinance is a reflection of what the goals set forth in the comp plan are, and a way to get to achieve those goals.
Right.
That's
It's a
what-
lot of work to
Yeah,
get
it's a
from
lot
point
of
A
work.
to point B though. It's a
So I
lot
guess-
of work.
So I guess like, in Laura's situation, so what is one to do? Right, if you have a non-conforming plan, but you have ultimately a project that is for the good of the community, like what resources are available, what can you do to get the help you need to plan forward?
There's waiver possibilities, but usually waivers involve a hardship of some sort, so you have to demonstrate, variance. You have to demonstrate hardship why you can't meet a certain standard.
We have a lot of hardship. going on.
A lot of hardship, but this is totally off topic.
And I guess this is how it ended. The key is continue to talk to staff, right? Have the conversation and see how you can amend that plan to make it work, or what are the steps. But the other thing that everybody has to understand is you have a want. Everyone that comes through the door has I don't really like that. Can we change that for me? And when you start to look at that, why have the rules that we didn't set? Why have the rules there if you're gonna bypass them every time, right?
I'm talking about bypassing the rules. I'm really talking about the idea of like
The community said.
what kind of support is there for a community member who has a project, who, is not a career developer, right? Who needs some sort of mentorship through the process in order to
Well, it's certainly reliance on town staff as best you can, obviously consultants. I mean, I'm an engineer, I've done all that stuff, but I don't do as much anymore, but I mean, you can have somebody help guide you through the process that might advise you about certain things that just not gonna be able to do, so.
I mean, we, at my work, we have had very positive.
Yeah.
Results, meeting with the town planner on, you know, hey, wanna do this with
Yeah.
property. Finding a way to, yes, you know, it's not always, we couldn't do exactly what we wanted to do. But it was, and we haven't done anything yet, but, yeah, but it was, you know, they were
I
helpful,
appreciate the
you
people,
know.
yeah.
All right, I wanna move on from this.
Well, I would go back.
Needs to rate us.
Yeah. I wanna hear Mr. Cross.
I would go back to the comment that was made by your real estate agent friend. Historically, Orono developed that concept out there. And I've been here a lot of years and involved with a lot of different developers and probably, would know a lot of the developers. And the ones that would come to town, and I'm going back 30, 35, 40 years, would come to town, would tell me, I'm never coming back. I won't do it. Recent years, there's been a big change in the town staff. I will support the fact that there's a big change there, but I think what your real estate agent is stuck in that. And Orono is stuck there because that's the reputation to develop and develop. So the developers immediately look at Hamden and Herman and all of those because you go into Herman with the development and the town wants to know, what can we do to make this happen?
Right.
Right.
And that has not always been in a project I did a number of years ago. I ended up having to make the street 4 feet wider than most streets are. Anyway, it looks more like a runway. And it was required to have a 5-foot sidewalk in an area where there are no sidewalks and things like that. That's hard on a developer. When you want affordable housing,
Exactly.
then you will have wide front lot. Well, to the developer, when you've got a wide frontage on that house, that means he's got to pay for more water main, more sewer, more storm drain, more gravel and more hot top. Well, now he's got to have a certain amount of money out of that lot. There goes your affordable housing because he can't do it.
Heard that from developers a lot too, is that it's so expensive to make smaller units or more smaller units, individual small units, that it's just not financially feasible in this market with the cost of building supplies. There's just no way to build that stock in an affordable way, period. And I've heard that from every developer I've talked to, that that's just not gonna happen right now in this market. And it might happen in the future as the market changes, or we see things like tiny homes of Maine.
So I was gonna say tiny.
Right,
homes.
tiny
Like
homes of Maine
the-
doing things, but outside of that,
The Bangor's project where the mobile home park that they turned into tiny homes, they had to do a lot of, I don't know what it is, but flexible thinking. And the town did, as far as like, I can't remember what it was. I think the sidewalks also were something to do with, like the sidewalks doubled as something else, or the street doubled as a sidewalk or something that had to have some kind of creative process because it was not affordable to build sidewalks in that little mobile home park and whatever the fire truck act, how wide it had to be or something like that, right? Like something could double as two things.
Yep.
But it's those kind of things that I think collectively as a group hoping to look at as we go through this process.
And from my experience, the connecting of all these dead end streets that you talk about needs to be done for both your utilities and the safety and everything else that goes, but you always run into the resistance of whoever lives on the end of that street doesn't want that street connected. I like being on the end of my dead end street. I don't
I get
want
at
the street to go
least,
through.
I probably get at least as many comments, if not more, from like community members that I'm friends with about things that we did that they don't like. Development that we've approved that they hate, and I get that how could you guys have possibly approved blah, blah, blah. Well, first of all, you didn't show up at the meeting. And think of all, it's in our
Popularity.
ordinance, right? Like it's a quasi judicial body, kind of bound by things, but I get at least as much of that as I get of Orono doesn't like development. I probably get maybe even more of the not in my backyard.
So
That
we have
know all
hurdles.
that.
I wanna move on, make sure we cover our topics.
I just want to make
Very
one quick
quiet.
comment that I don't, this is, you might think this is off topic. I don't think it is at all. Because there's a lot of deep understanding.
Inappropriate.
as to what's going on here.
Agreed.
The comprehensive plan and the zoning laws that the council passes and all of these relationships are very complex. It's important that we, as this group, understand them well.
I mean, last time, 10 years ago, we talked about Evan, he guided the whole process, but he showed us an example of a neighborhood, I think it was in Scarborough, that was just a little outside the box, but it was attractive. It was, not just the standard neighborhood, just cookie cutter, but it drew people in. And if you take a look at it, I think, yeah, Scarborough.
It is.
Cape Elizabeth area, and there's some really creative stuff going on there. And when I saw that presentation, I was like, wow, that would be a good fit for Orono. So those kinds of projects, it'd be interesting to figure out a way to incentivize, make them happen.
Can I just ask for a data point, and maybe like the population of Orono schools over RSU 26 schools over a period of time, and then if it's possible, how many are sending students in the high school?
We just pulled all that. That's like sitting at the central office.
Perfect.
Thank you.
In your summaries, and I don't know where it should live or whether it should be repeated, but the family decrease and the ages of those people are the same as your like prime working age. You refer to them as prime child rearing age, but it's also your prime workforce. And I don't see that highlighted, that like it's concerning that workforce population is declining.
Yeah.
Like, and that's, I just think that needs to be noted as well. And the affordable senior housing that you're referring to, I'm assuming there's affordable subsidized housing, which is what that would be. It's 55 plus, not 65 plus.
Yep, so that's a good point. Let's talk about that quickly. In this area, I have attempted to use affordable when I mean like subsidized or regulated affordable housing.
Yeah.
And then just use, housing that is affordable, like that whole thing. When I'm just talking about, market rate housing that would be open to folks that make potentially less income, if that makes sense. So there, yes, but to your point, yeah, it would be subsidized or regulated affordable housing there.
Because ADUs aren't necessarily affordable.
Right, they're not capital A affordable, they are housing that is affordable because of their low cost of
Yeah.
construction, yeah.
How have you found the rental market in that type of housing? Because you have a number of units, I assume still, but.
Yeah, in the what market?
Well, I'm just thinking, because last time we talked about your units, because he has some by across from Thrift, or the old Thriftway. And around, but how are you finding occupancy and just a lot of.
This year it's been a little different. Actually, last year it was too there, but I think I'm correct. Their enrollment, university, I think, is down this year, and it immediately shows up in my world when the enrollment.
It's projected to continue going down dramatically over the next 5, 6, 7 years.
And it would make sense that this year is different because that started to happen a year or 2 years ago, and those kids are now moving off campus. They
This
would've been
last
on
class
campus.
was the largest ever, and we're just gonna.
Yeah, so they're-
probably gonna
yeah, so it's gonna
continue
go
to be-
worse, but
yeah.
yes, they're now moving off campus because they were on campus their first year.
We've actually because of that, I've been. People I've been promoting, reaching out to like the housing in Old Town. We have some tenants now that are through housing in Old Town, and
Like have vouchers, you mean?
Yeah.
Or, yeah, I do think there's an opportunity there to like rebrand or into more kind of family
Yeah.
centered housing, like those developments, like the Hubbard Farm, like that development was family condo style housing. And
Class
it's-
that as affordable.
What's that?
I would class Hubbard Farms as affordable.
I don't know. I just have seen the units for sale, which in the scheme of things are cheaper than buying a house, but.
Yeah.
It's just, it could be a way to balance, if enrollment's going down, rethinking some of the student housing. Could be an opportunity.
Well, the market will drive it there.
Yeah,
If the enrollment goes down, the market will,
Well,
the market always works. Demand, it's what determines the price and it's what determines your customer.
sort of, I would say the housing market right now is broken. I don't think the market has led us to a place that works for our population right now. So, but that's a whole nother philosophical conversation potentially for you. But I don't think the market is necessarily gonna say, oh, we need to rehab this and turn this into family housing. I think that's a thing that the town would wanna talk about and say, do we want more?
does.
Yeah, family housing and, ooh, there's some areas that could be redeveloped for that. Let's talk to people about that.
So I agree, there are two ways to look at housing, right? Market, what is the market demand and how does that happen? And then if you put more units, theoretically, the cost goes down. Or you have to artificially change the market.
Yeah,
Right, the market's the market, you can't fix it unless you add something in and add value added, whether it's incentive, density incentives, or whether it's, TIF dollars or something like that to change it. So those are kind of two options to work with that, because either you're gonna put more units and try to drive the cost down that way, or you're gonna have to somehow artificially figure out the market.
I think there are some European countries that have, found a way to do that. I think the consequence of capitalism is what we're, living out, and this emphasis on, people being able to make money, with homes. And, I think that if the community's orientation is to make it more accessible to live here, not necessarily to own here, but to live here, and to have town influence on, stabilizing the cost of housing in the community, then it seems like this is a place where we could have that conversation. But, I do think it's the problem that we are facing is not a universal one.
I think that's exactly the kinds of conversations we'll end up having to have, especially once we start hearing from the public. As soon as we share some of this data around housing affordability and availability, I think that, that's when that conversation will end up coming up with the public, and then we'll have to likely address it through a variety of channels, most likely in policymaking.
Can we also, could you also add data around University of Maine enrollment and,
The
put
president,
that in there?
the president's strategic plan is out, so she's got a website there with all of that kind of data, and also the Office of Institutional Research has all of the student level university data. So you can go to the Office of Institutional Research's website and you can look up anything. You can break it down. It's got like things that you can move around. That's really helpful if you're looking for trends. But I know that at the re-envisioning meeting we just had, like as a whole campus, we talked about that declining population. So those are numbers they have, and I think they're in one or both.
And is that, do they break it out by, declining populations that might actually be here in Orono and live here, like versus people that, I don't know, commuter students or?
Just enrollment by year is the number that's projected to go down, right? And part of that is that the number of students of that age in the state of Maine is declining rapidly, and the other problem is that states are sending fewer kids from out of state, so we're getting fewer people from out of state and there's fewer people within. And it's kind of both of those.
So that is fewer students, not some other model of education within fewer students. Okay.
Can I ask, in terms of, isn't like UMaine 30% or something commuter students or some really high
I
percent?
think it might be more than that. It's a
More than
lot.
that?
Yeah.
But does that include the kids living in like the Avenue or something?
Mhm.
Which is a little odd. Okay,
Yep.
okay.
It's hard.
No,
to
they're
get-
they're
it's hard to get
technically
my
commuter
feel.
students.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have the black tag. So if you live in the Ave, you have a black tag.
Yeah, okay.
I just wanna say something because I do have a prior commitment. I have to get my kid, I have to leave here at 7:30. So if I walk out, I apologize. I didn't wanna skip it.
No, thank you.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
I'll move through economy and, yeah, we'll try to get through that. And then
Just
we
a
have-
quickie, we're sticking 6 to 8 and we're gonna try
Yeah.
to keep. to
Yeah.
I'll usually be able to, just their dad can't watch the.
Yeah, that's just for the benefit of everybody.
It says
Reminder.
Celtics game on.
Yeah.
8:30.
Oh, bring Ben, they could, I don't know, destroy the building.
Don't get excited.
So obviously, I think we're kind of in this room generally aware, we have a relatively small year-round population. It's not even half of the total university enrollment. So, and that's generally been following trends since about the sixties, when the enrollment at UMaine really started to take off. So Orono, because of that small year-round population, has historically been unable to support the same array of retail or commercial services that might locate in a service center community, which we are a service center community designated by the state. Although it's a secondary service center community to the larger Bangor service center. So as such, most stores and services have tended to locate in Bangor instead. But we are seeing some trends that this might be changing as larger employers, Tyler Technologies is a big one, currently building that 15,000 square foot headquarters in Orono for about 100 employees, have begun to locate in the community. And that employer specifically actually noted that it chose its project site due to the close proximity of the UMaine campus and the opportunity for what they called research synergy. So there's sort of an opportunity here to build on that momentum, namely through physical infrastructure improvements like enhancing walkability, which I talk a little bit more about in this section as well. And that could be a key priority in sort of unlocking future opportunities in the future. So I talked a little bit about walkability. The physical distance between the UMaine campus and our downtown is usually greater than what would be considered a comfortable walking distance. This was also something that was documented in the 2014 plan and has changed slightly through the addition of a shuttle bus service, but the walk itself is a little bit longer than what would be sort of the comfortable distance for most people. So the shortest road distance from the major activity center of UMaine's campus to downtown Orono is 1.3 and a little bit extra miles. There is a 1 mile pedestrian trail available, but again, typically what most people would be considered walkable, especially in a Maine winter, is about 3/4 of a mile or a 15-minute walk. So a little bit longer than what most people might undertake. So in general, I think enhancing the walkability between those key points especially would allow students to more easily patronize local businesses and alleviate some of the vehicular traffic issues that we have documented in the past. Obviously, the shuttle bus service has gone some way in doing that, but additional enhancements might be necessary. Similarly, obviously, we're not going to be able to shorten that distance. We can create the infrastructure, but the distance isn't shorter. So if we can shorten the distance between other key points, get some more feet on the street, as we like to call it, or more people walking or biking between activities, would also be considered a opportunity here. So that could be through things like activating, arts and cultural amenities, things that get people out of their cars and choosing to walk or bike, locating or co-locating, I guess I should say, office space within the downtown, as well as maybe more specifically higher density housing. And the higher density housing is usually what leads to, the larger restaurants and other, I guess I would say more service oriented businesses to locate here because they get customers at all hours of the day. You know, they're not as dependent on like an office being here only between 9 and 5. You could start to get people at 8 o'clock at night when it's a beautiful evening and you want to go for a stroll. So activating that sort of feet on the street, both through land use amendments, but also sort of arts and culture amenities and other amenity investment might be a good opportunity. Then I just wanted to talk a little bit about growth sectors. So I talked in this section about where people are currently working. So if we're aiming to match the skills of where people are currently working, with new jobs in the community, that would be things like healthcare, education, social services, and retail. Obviously, we had a little bit of a conversation about, you know, without some serious intervention, there likely won't be a lot of new education jobs available in the community in the future. But based on our projected population trends, healthcare might be a major opportunity. And of course, we have Bangor as our primary service center with the hospital being located there. That's not necessarily something that will likely change. So they'll probably continue to be the primary service center. Really, the opportunity for Orono is more outpatient specialty services and healthcare related offices, things like the dermatology office, some of these, you know, more I guess I would say, yeah, more healthcare related dentists, things like that, rather than specifically hospital required.
There was at the tech park for a while, Northern Light did have an outpost
Yeah,
there, so that, I mean, that was a good use.
yeah, and those kinds of things end up offering sort of a much higher earning potential and attractive career opportunities to people. I do just want to note that any new office locations would need to be planned strategically to create demand and synergies within the existing commercial and mixed use areas. So, you know, when you're thinking about these more outpatient offices, locating them closer to downtown so that like typically you're not choosing to go to, let's say, you might not be actively seeking out, let's say, an acupuncturist, but if you're seeing them every day on your walk to work or your drive to work, you might consider going to that. So that's more the choice-based healthcare and related sectors.
I'd like to see some data on self-employed people. I made my living out of my house for 30 years. Phil's done the same thing. Other people in the community have done the same thing. Ray Hill on Main Street, his business. All that is made possible by development of the fiber optic network, big one, allowing that to happen. And,
There were some numbers,
we need some numbers on that.
I think we did have a number.
So working out of your home is an important thing in the current economy, our current system.
Do you see self-employed versus remote workers as two different populations?
Well, not in terms of what they need
Yeah.
to do that.
So at least according to American Community Survey data from the Census Bureau, it's 41 people in 2022. It's less than 1% of the labor force in the community is self-employed specifically, like working for themselves. And then there are 30, at least according to our home occupation registration, home-based businesses. That home-based businesses and that self-employed number is likely higher, like people who are either not reporting a home-based business. I don't report my home-based business because I don't see clients, you know, that you would never know. So that 30 number is likely much higher, just because of people who don't see clients. And then same for the self-employed individuals. We have this self-reported data, but those who do it full-time are likely probably higher.
And yet we bring in an incredible amount of revenue from out of state and spend it in this community.
Mhm.
And that's an important thing.
You said the education sector isn't gonna be an employment opportunity. Why did you say that?
Just because of the enrollment projections.
Oh, but with an aging workforce, we don't know.
Yeah, I
It's
mean,
two separate things.
yeah, so it could be that people are retiring from jobs and that could be an opportunity. I think what I'm really getting at in terms of new jobs, like jobs that aren't currently existing or filled by anyone that would
Okay.
be new to the community.
I was a little surprised at the small tech number. I actually thought that would be, have a good night. I thought that would be a little larger, but you know, Tyler Technology, that's a really significant addition, but
Yeah.
I would think that this town could cater a little bit more to those types of jobs, just with university affiliation, but
Yeah.
And
I think there's only 6 people in the Tyler building right now. At most, maybe 2.
I don't know how many are there right now, but.
2, yeah.
Just, I think they've done their grand opening, but they've just moved in, so.
Yeah.
And I think they're still over in the other office too. They have a Bangor office as well.
Yes,
But
yeah.
I had.
They're
given my
transitioning.
directives to them, so I don't think they've fully made that transition.
So the university has said that as people retire, they're not replacing them. For the short term, at least in the next 5 years. So Tom saw that, my husband saw that in his department, they had 3 retirements and 1 outside hire that they didn't fill. Right, and so they've just decided that internally, as people retire or leave the university, they've decided not to fill those positions unless they're absolutely mission critical and we're just gonna share. Right, so there's somebody in ORA who does my exact job. If that person retires, I might have to do my job plus ORA's job. And that's how they've decided they're gonna deal with the $20 million budget shortfall or whatever it is. Something like that. It's huge.
yes.
Yeah, so that's how we're actually not, it's not just that we're not seeing a growth in education sector because of the university, we're probably gonna actually see a decline in the short term at least, 5
The other
years.
thing about tech jobs, which is harder now, is that, and even Tyler Tech has said this, they have the capacity, but they have a very, very flexible work schedule that most of them are not in that office, maybe once a week. And so when you're seeing the tech, specifically the tech companies, they don't have to have a physical office. You're seeing that Northern Light was the same idea. They had that was a call center. Call
Right.
centers are gone. People are
Yeah.
working from home. It could be a call. If you're gonna have a call center, they're doing it from their house. When after the pandemic, I think they had like 2, maybe 100 people over there, and they polled them all and they said, who wants to come back? And like 2 people said, I do, and they're like, okay, we'll put you over here. We're not gonna open the whole building again. So they, so I think that the pandemic did change some of those remote style, and they really started to look at, and you see that in turn in the commercial market for renting to commercial and or buying or building, because that becomes a real liability and a risk to put up a building that maybe you're not gonna be able to fill. So,
Yeah,
And yet they build that building.
well, their model is really about the college students, because they're gonna have about 60 interns in there every summer. And that's a workforce thing. So they came here with the
Oh,
idea.
Tyler,
Yeah, they came here with the idea that we can bring all these students, put them in our building, offer them jobs, and we don't have to go out, we've captured them before they get on the market type of thing. That is a
Back over the
market,
bridge.
that is a market that, from a business standpoint, that we've tried to exploit. We were looking at smaller. Tyler came in kind of like big and we're like, oh, that's even better. But we were looking at, could you put regional offices here for companies all over Maine that could house, because that's a goal of the university is keeping the students close here in the summer, getting their internships, which also help us because that doesn't decline our population in the summer. So those things were kind of in the works, trying to get small companies, and we got Tyler to come and go, oh, we'll do this on a grand scale, so.
Tyler actually has given pretty extensively to the university in student recruitment. They've given a huge amount of money and they work with my department in particular because we're the ones who do kind of innovation and whatever. But they've put their money where that is, and they've actually said to the university and to anybody who will listen, they would love to talk with other businesses about their model and about how to do that and about what their long-term planning is, because they said the amount of money they are putting in, if they even get 1 or 2 students a year, they've more than paid for their investment at the end of it. So that's their model and they're hoping to make that work. And I think they will. I mean, like you said, 100 interns,
have-
right now, they're not coming from UMaine.
Yeah, they have a similar setup in Michigan, they have a similar setup in Texas,
Yep.
at U Texas, so it's not just here, they've realized that. mean, we have engineering firm that does the same thing, 2 or 3, and they take probably one of those every year and hire them. They're seeing the value of the workforce development piece of that and being close to that. I would say that most, if not all, the businesses that contact me want to be here because of that. In one way, shape, or form, whether it's college students, whether it's connection with the university from a research standpoint, those things. They want to be here because of the proximity.
My business, we partnered with the university and we've had 30 plus students over time. It's outstanding for us.
So,
Then you come back to the question, where are these businesses going to locate?
Right.
Where are they gonna locate? Do they have to build something new? There's a lot of
Not
empty
right now,
space.
they don't.
There's a lot of empty space in town,
Yeah,
a lot of empty space, too much empty space.
yeah.
I do have a couple more before we go into questions, sorry. So I think we've kind of already touched on it a little bit, so about 9.5% of Orono workers were working from home the majority of the time in 2022. Obviously, for obvious reasons, that number is up significantly from 2010, when only about 200 people worked remotely. This means a lot of good things for convenience, retail, and service-oriented businesses, as a larger number of potential customers stay in town during the workday. So back in 2011, the town did a downtown plan where they surveyed customers of local businesses, and specifically that convenience, retail, and service category is really looking for, that feet on the street convenient customer that they can attract during the workday or, around that time. So, coffee shops and hair salons and other, service oriented businesses would potentially do well in the future and might wish to start locating in Orono because of that high number of work from home people. This is sort of an issue, but I'm turning it into an opportunity. So the town is likely losing about 3,000 people during the summer months. Obviously, as a university community, that's mainly from the undergraduates who live on campus or live adjacent to campus, returning to their hometowns. Tourism is not currently a huge part of the local economy, but obviously Hotel Ursa, that's a new boutique hotel located on the University of Maine campus and open to the public, might present an opportunity to market the community's vibrant downtown and quality of life to tourists at all times of the year. Okay, and that's really all I have.
I think also its location between Acadia and Katahdin Woods and Waters is an opportunity
Yeah.
for tourism, I think to me, that would be an attractive, if I was to come to Maine, and those would be the places that I would want to go, or no, very attractive. Ticks all my boxes and vacationing, travel.
Well, the local amenities, that was such a key point the last time, was the recreational opportunities.
Yeah.
And now with a Caribou Bog facility, that
Yeah,
it's just even grown so much
right,
more.
that's key.
we are seeing and hearing that we are becoming a little bit of that centrally located tourism in the summer.
I've heard that too.
Because there are still things going on in the university, and there's still that cultural piece that people can have stuff in Bangor, go to a concert, stuff on campus, but also go to Acadia and not be stuck in trying to pay what it costs to be.
Oh, and you can kayak here and you can mountain
Yes.
bike here, you can do all the things
Yep.
here.
Where do they stay?
So
Where's the vacation to stay in this town?
Airbnb.
I will tell you two things, the Airbnbs, but I know when the University Inn was open, she had regulars that were coming. And that is one of the goals of Hotel Ursa, is looking at that tourism piece as well. And I mean, the Blackberry Inn is there, and I can tell you that unless there's a Jimmy Buffett concert, which won't be, but every place, and you can't find a place to stay anywhere, right? I mean, the big concerts, all of these hotels are full, but other than that, there are those opportunities.
Well, I
I'm
think that
curious,
there's a lack of
Yep.
places with.
Do Orono's ordinances allow
They do.
Airbnbs and
They do.
VRBOs? They
Now
do?
you can have-
that's what I was just gonna ask, that data isn't in here, right? Even, I know it would be like a point in time, but like. What does the Airbnb or VRBO market look like in Orono? Like, is it
not-
tiny?
It's not huge. No, and maybe why it's, and I've gotta go back and look to be exact, but we kind of melded that with the rental registration to make it easy to do that.
Okay.
And that's relatively new, and we don't actively go out and see if, people have to say, I have an Airbnb and
Right.
register it.
Right,
For us to know.
right.
But it is, even if you go on, like, if you go on and look, there aren't a ton.
There's a risk of.
There's a
of
handful.
That further taken away from the. housing
And what
stock.
I would suggest is most people recognize that if I have something that I do as an Airbnb, I can make way more money off it if I'm renting it year round.
And there are some communities where that has decimated the
Yes.
housing stock.
Yeah, absolutely,
Bar
absolutely.
Harbor's have it, Bar Harbor has a big problem.
Yep,
Yeah.
most of the coastal communities, that's why the ADUs were such a, bringing up the idea that you can have ADUs anywhere, that was like, oh gosh, what are we gonna do? It has not presented itself as an issue, a major issue in Orono in any way, because most people, if they have something that they could rent in that capacity, they are renting it they can rent it to somebody year round, whether it's a
I'm
student or.
surprised students aren't doing it in the Avenue and stuff.
The Avenue's pretty strict
So
about it.
you still,
Oh, they don't allow it?
yeah, you see a lot of them
Okay.
try to sublease in the summer.
Yeah.
And even that they have a hard time doing, that's allowed. but
It
then-
seems like a data point that should be included,
So we do
whether
have-
it's inconsequential or not.
Yeah, we have that in the housing section.
Oh, it is? Oh, okay.
140 are vacant due to seasonal, recreational, or occasional use. That is probably camps at push-up, but also, second homes of snowbirds, Airbnbs, things like that.
Oh. Oh,
So, but it's
okay.
not Airbnb, but I think we're
Yeah.
talking about like short-term rentals specifically as a data point, just because I think that communities that experience this as a hardship in housing stock deal with it retroactively, which becomes much more difficult than dealing with it proactively.
Just to understand where we're at.
Yeah, and if we are, on the cusp of, because to be honest, I didn't know about the ADU thing until I read this packet. And if we're on the cusp of that becoming something that more people would do, then it seems like we would want them to do so after an awareness of whatever sort of limitation would be put on short-term rentals in Orono versus investing
Mhm.
something based on a projected income that's, short-term rental generated and then learning that they can't have that.
It's not really.
Yeah, I mean, some of the solutions to our foot traffic problem would be, like, it'd be great if we had a really robust tourism plan to get people into Orono. I had like 65 ideas that flew through my head, like immediately. And I'm sure everybody else has like a ton of ideas about how to increase tourism in Orono and how to market ourselves in certain ways. But if we do that, we're also asking people to develop short-term rentals. Right, and so there are going to, with any solution that we have that's going to fix or help or improve one thing, we're going to have kind of add-on challenges. And that, I think that's probably right. If we anticipate that, we can get ahead of it so it doesn't impact our housing stock and cause this other problem over here to get worse.
So I will say this, having lived in a different college community that was near the beach, so down at URI. They have a ton of beach houses that are all summer rentals, and they rent them in the winter to college students, and that it's only whatever it ends up being, 10-month lease. And then they rent them in the summer for what they were renting them a month for a week. And it doesn't really affect that because, in that scenario, it's.
If you're looking to attract college students versus families.
Yeah, they just rotate that through. So if all of a sudden there was this huge market, I think a businessman like Dennis Cross would say, well, I'll do a 10-month lease on my college students and rent them out weekly. If I can do that and make the money, they would do that. But you're right, it's all of this, all these things are deciding what we want Orono to be. And then trying to figure out how do we figure out how to make that happen, right? I have always asked myself, with the housing piece and attracting people, what's the saturation point? I keep saying, you build more houses, people are just gonna come, because all I ever hear is, I wanna live in Orono, right? And the market says, people wanna live in Orono. So what's the size and how do you manage that to make it to be what Orono, people want Orono to be, right?
To me, I don't know, maybe I'm biased because like right now in this stage of my life, I'm in the midst of a family, but it feels like we need families here. Like we're paying as a community for the infrastructure for families, the pool, the schools, that like that, and I don't see a big downside to that. Like,
And our family population has shrunk demonstrably.
right, right. So it feels like that's,
How has it shrunk in relationship to how the family populate, family household population in the state? Because I know that that's a problem statewide. Are we in
Right.
line with that or are we higher because our cost of living is higher here? I don't know the answer, but that might be an interesting one to dig into because we might not actually have the decline we think we have. Right? It might just be the general decline that we're seeing statewide and actually even in a lot of places nationwide.
Yeah, Herman has not seen a decline in family population. Portland, South Portland, that area has not seen a decline in families. Really is a matter of looking at, where are the school projects happening? And the school projects are, Cumberland Yarmouth just barely passed a $53 million school budget, because part of it was driven by the need for a new elementary school, but they paired that with a turf field. And there were anti-turf folks who were angry that they were buckled together because they wanted to approve the school without approving the turf.
Smart.
But I just think that it is, and that is part of the serendipity of Orono, is that we have been, continue to be a place to which families want to come.
even though we don't have turf.
Even though we love our grass.
Especially because we don't have to.
We just want lights on the soccer field is what we want.
But the other question is, and I'm curious about this data, I think I understand it, is there are a lot of people that will come and have their kids go through 12th grade and leave. So that family doesn't stay, like, we're done and.
Well, that's what we have now, right?
Right, we're done, and it's either, yeah, but there are a lot of folks that will come here, whether it's because the nature of their work at the university, I'm gonna keep them here, I'm gonna work and then I'm gonna move someplace else. So,
Housing
it's,
stock turnover.
well, right, but is it that balance of, are we losing some of these household families because the minute their kids are, they're gone, or they're, yeah.
My understanding of communities is that, and I say this as somebody who was on Islesboro and, the talk of the school, and like the Islesboro Central School is what keeps this community alive. If we lose this school, we lose this community. And I do think that there is a dominant element of this community that hinges on the unique dynamism that the schools offer. And if that goes away, I think that the nature of the community will change.
You just look at the vote on the school budget. Passes overwhelmingly, every time, passes overwhelmingly.
Well, I can tell you that's why I moved to town, was the schools and
Why we moved to
really, I mean, and the, not just the schools, but it was the after-school opportunities that, I think it's back now, but it went away for a little while, but and I worked in town too, it was between, now that it's, it's very heavily between Old Town and Orono, and it just landed on, just what Orono had to offer my kids, and it's been great, like, I could not,
Same here. We came here, two kids went through schools and.
Yeah.
I started my job in the district July 1 of 2020 and started looking for houses July 3rd of 2020 and closed on our house August 20th of 2020. Just because of like being in the district for literally a couple of days, it was like, I've got to get my kids here. And I have a student who'll be a 12th grader next year who looks at her younger brother with envy at the childhood that he is getting in this community. And, she spent a lot of her growing up in Hamden. And, to her, the differences between the culture of this district versus the culture of that one is so stark despite the proximity, and in a way that has changed the course of her life. And that, is not anomalous, right? Kids who come through the high school who leave with this proud walk across the stage that leave us thinking, holy cow, like, look at what you have done. And getting notes from parents, I read an email from a parent today, written to one of our English teachers, that said, and this is a student who moved to the district from out of state, mostly because of university, right? So not a family that chose Orono specifically. I didn't know that the experience that my daughter had in this building was possible in a public school.
When you take your kids out to visit colleges, go to schools, they know Orono schools. In North Adams, Massachusetts, they know about Orono schools. Vassar, they know about Orono schools.
My kid doesn't wanna go on sabbatical, because she doesn't wanna leave the school. Well, we're gonna go on sabbatical, she can just deal with it, but.
From an economy perspective, I guess what and I don't know this, but like, what are the goals of growing an economy? Is it like growing a tax base? Is it having the town be some attractive for people to live here, but we don't have any housing, so I don't know, like, what, and I look at like healthcare, how much percentage of healthcare that are nonprofits, and I saw our little agencies a top employer and we're a nonprofit,
Yeah.
but, so I just like wonder, what are we, and I don't know this because I'm not an economist, like what is trying to be achieved through looking at the economy?
So I
and
invited
balance?
Mitch here to talk about that, so I'll let him take it.
So it can be many, I mean, really your community kind of sets what you want, right? And what you want it to look like. I think ultimately you can look at it in two ways. One is helping set the value, increase value, right? When you put businesses in, that's a tax base, that has a different draw on your services, right? And usually less of a draw on your services depending upon what it is. But it also attracts people to your community and it creates a pride of place. You hear that a lot, a pride of place, and that isn't just businesses, that's your recreational, that's your childcare, that's your schools, that's all those pieces, the road condition, all that stuff. I think that Orono is one of those places that presents a unique challenge in that we are somewhat seasonal. We do heavily rely on this weird college population that comes and goes, so that drives a lot of these things. But what I see that becomes really successful in Orono are unique businesses, those niche businesses that people will support and say, we don't have a name. And we are also seeing that drive people to come here. We hear now, which we didn't hear before, our restaurant brewery scene is driving people here in the summer. They don't really want to be here during the school year, but the summer, they're coming. Our trampoline park, we're getting people from all over to come to you're like, why would somebody, there aren't a lot of them, right? So you've got people coming to that. You have a disc golf, place that
Place is hopping.
it's packed all the time, right? So
Who would have thought?
it's
American breweries.
right, and it's really that balance of how do all of those businesses interact with one another to create the culture in which you want, but also support you, right? So like when you think about Tyler Technology ticked a lot of boxes that were in the comprehensive plan because it was attaching to the university, bringing really high wage jobs, in a sector.
They were building a building.
Yeah, well, building a building, high wage jobs and a young population. I mean, that tech world is a kind of that 30-something world of young people that you're bringing possibly to your community, which sometimes takes too long, but come here, live here, fail here, stay here, right? So I think the overarching thing that's always a challenge with the university community is gonna be transient. There is always gonna be turnover. It doesn't matter how hard you try, there's gonna be turnover. And we turn a large portion of our population over in that 5 to 7 year period, whether it's students or whether it's people that come here to have their first job and then go someplace else in the education world to get the next job. So there's a lot of pieces to that, but I guess part of what I do is sit around and listen to what people are talking about, what the community wants to say, okay, how do we support that and attract that in a way, that can work and can be sustainable. The worst thing that you can have is a lot of in and out of businesses. Like I started one and it's closed. I started one and it's closed. Because then people think, I don't know that I want to be
Right,
there, right? So, but I think there are a lot of different portions of that, right? we have a grocery store, which is great. It doesn't seem to be it's not in the downtown, but we have a grocery store, you know, we have some restaurants, we have, you know, we're lacking a little bit in the retail world, but that's a hard place to be, but we have landlords that want retail, which is good, because it's a riskier proposition than some of the other things, so. I think it's kind of finding that balance and, you know, hearing what people want and trying to balance that with the other amenities that you have. Skiing, we have this amazing trail system that nobody really knows about, or they're starting to know about. How do you market that? That attracts people here and goes to the brewery or goes to the restaurant. So it's kind of this balance. And I always listen, you know, when people say, we should have one of those, I'm like, all right, well, where would we put it? What would it look like? You know, I think that's part of it. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah.
Maybe a little long.
Yeah, and I mean, some communities have invested in, well, I mean, Orono has too, right? Like invested in these concepts, like the call center concept.
Mhm.
And that hasn't panned
Yep.
out. So like, how to like, I mean, it was great to hear about the internship because that's sort of
Yep.
like a constant, but like how, like not chasing the next greatest thing. And then have it be, oh, wow, there's a pandemic and everybody's going
Right.
home, you know? But trying to, I guess that you do that through a balance of.
So you do, and the other challenge, to be fair, the other challenge that higher education poses is in order for them to stay relevant, they have to follow the next best, they always have to be cutting edge, right? If they were just to stick with certain things, you look at, you know, we have the largest 3D printer and everybody's, oh, you know, that wasn't there 10 years ago, right? And what comes out of that and the ideas and the things that come out of that kind of spin off. And, you know, are they all gonna stay? No. I think you are looking for, I think the days of 50,000 square foot call centers are gone, and even that size building
Right.
are really a challenging thing in a smaller rural community, and we're having to redevelop it. I mean, obviously, the Northern Light building that was a call center is open, you know, and people are going, what do I do with that? It's big and, you know, so how do you do that? I mean, we just brought Sargent. Sargent is now in Orono, which is
How long was that building? open?
right, and you think about that, and they're one of the largest employee-owned companies in the state.
Yeah.
And their headquarters are in Orono now, you know.
Trying to lease half of the building.
Yeah.
But
Right, yep, so, I mean,
Put
we
some
have
housing
that
upstairs, Catherine. Put some housing upstairs.
Right, folks,
It's
we're
eight.
almost at 8. So I don't wanna limit conversation, but I do like to stick to time. Isabel, could you give us a heads up on what's next?
So we have historic and archaeological resources, more land use conversation, a more in-depth land use conversation of sort of our existing zoning districts and what they allow. And I think that's it.
Excellent. We having invited guests.
I'm hoping to get someone from the Historical Society if available.
What is the date of the next meeting? Sorry,
One moment.
I feel like I have two in
Was
my.
it July 12th?
It was July 12th, yes. Or July 10th, rather.
Oh. So Mitch, I'll see you next week for that planning board discussion.
All right, before we jump into that, thank you, everybody, for the conversation. Appreciate the preparation, good discussion, and any additional questions, I'm sure stuff might pop into your head. Feed Isabel on that, and again, there's gonna be ample opportunities throughout the process. This is gonna go on for a while, so we can revisit things. Thanks.
Thank
Thank you.
I'm just gonna stop recording that.